Hey everyone, Chaps here, and if you're watching this, you're likely giving Gears of War Reloaded a shot. This is basically a re-release of Ultimate Edition, which is a remake of Gears 1 with some added goodies. It's a fantastic cover-based third-person shooter, which has been a fan favorite for almost 20 years. While it's fun, it can be unforgiving at times, so in this video I want to break down some tips and suggestions for best enjoying the game. Oh, and I'll do my best to keep this spoiler-free. We'll begin with a few conceptual things before getting into any of the mechanics. The first two tips are probably pretty obvious. Number one is just play on normal difficulty your first time through. If you don't play shooters, maybe casual, but normal is a pretty standard difficulty. Second, at the start there's a split path with one being training, and as you guessed it, training obviously makes sense. It does a decent job of showing you some of the basics. A bit less obvious is that the game is best enjoyed co-op. Don't get me wrong, it's still great single player, that's how I first enjoyed it. But Gears got a lot of praise from its couch co-op and online co-op campaign when it first launched. The first game in particular does a great job of emphasizing the teamwork aspect, so if you can, find a co-op buddy. Oh, and if the game does split you up and you're playing co-op, it's for a reason. You'll often find spots where one player is pinned down and the other player has a great line of sight for crossfire. The last of the conceptual tips is something that really pained hardcore fans for quite a long time, and that's the concept of negative space. The game was written with intentionally ambiguous phrases and lore. It's there for a reason, to make you ask questions, dig in, and get immersed in the lore. Many of the questions get answered through future installments, novels, comics, or some of them even later in the game. But remember, when the game came out, this is all there was. If you have questions, I'd encourage you to think through them, but just keep playing. Don't look things up online. Once you finish the game, if you still have questions, you have some options. If you really enjoyed the game, consider trying the others. They're on Game Pass after all. And that's the best way. You can slowly learn the lore over time like many of us have. Alternatively, if you only have a PlayStation and can't play the other games, maybe you could watch some Let's Play videos of the other ones online. But as you can imagine, that's not quite as enjoyable. As a last resort, yeah, there's the Gears Wiki, and plenty of Gears lore videos to watch. I hate to encourage that for people who haven't naturally discovered the lore through the games, but it's better than nothing, I guess, if you have questions. But okay, enough of the conceptual stuff, what about actual gameplay? Let's start with your loadout. Personally, I try to stick with a Lancer as my primary at all times. Contrary to versus multiplayer, in campaign your rifle is actually your best friend. The Lancer is by far my most used weapon in campaign. In my pistol slot, I typically try to pick up a Boltock if I can find one. The snub is fun, and can headshot people in Gears 1. But the Boltock is just so powerful. In the grenade slot, obviously I'll have frags, but what about the secondary slot? Well, a lot of people gravitate towards the Gnasher, and that's what you typically see online. For me, what's in that slot depends on the environment I'm in and what difficulty I'm on. In the easier modes, I may put the Gnasher in, as it's quick and effective if used properly, and more on that later, using it properly. On higher difficulties, I actually tend to put the Hammer Burst. Again, rifles are your friend. After chewing through ammo, you can usually find quite a few hammer bursts laying around to pick up or grab ammo. But what about the real power weapons? Personally, I don't use them that much in campaign. The long shot just doesn't seem really useful. The boom shot is relatively weak in Gears 1, at least compared to what you would expect it to be, and has a pretty low ammo count. The torque bow? Well, I do actually occasionally pick that one up. Basically, if it's a close quarters map on normal or lower, I'm going to have my Gnasher. Otherwise, I aim for the torque bow or the hammer burst. On hardcore and higher, it's often the hammer burst, and occasionally the torque if I know what's coming up. But then there's also co-op. In co-op, I feel like the best route for weapons is one player should have the Lancer and hammer burst combo at basically all times. The second player always has a Lancer or a hammer burst in their primary slot, and in their secondary they can rotate through whatever power weapons you see laying around. So those are your weapons, but how should you utilize them? I'll start with the most unfortunate one. I said the Lancer is my most used weapon, and it's really satisfying using that iconic chainsaw bayonet, but sadly, it's just not that useful. I mean, it's cool, and it will one-hit many enemies, but it leaves you super exposed. If you are in close quarters, your best bet is the Gnasher on lower difficulties, either that or the often overlooked melee option. Personally, when dealing with wretches, I opt to just melee everything most of the time. Melee can still work against some weaker enemies, but your best bet is just to back up and keep your distance. And if push comes to shove, don't be afraid to hip fire. Back up and spray away from the hip. And speaking of hip firing, don't be afraid to hip fire grenades. Yeah, I know that sounds kind of odd, but you know what I mean. Don't L-trig or whatever you do to aim them. Blind throwing them is much faster, and you can get pretty close to your target with a bit of practice. I'll also note that with grenades, I don't often find myself using them against larger groups of enemies. They're just not as effective as I typically would hope they would be. Occasionally I'll use them if there's 2 or more boomers next to each other to put out a lot of damage, or if I'm really struggling with something. But more often than not, I find myself just using frags to close emergence holes. If you see a hole starting to form, just toss a frag in there and close it up. It will make your life much easier. There's also a surprising number of frags scattered around the map, so you should never be running low. Let's talk about the enemies a bit. I mentioned the wretches earlier. They're weak. On lower difficulties, just melee. And on higher difficulties, keep your distance and shoot. Another weak one is the sniper. If you see an enemy sniper, which it often gives you a little prompt and lets you know they're there, I'd suggest taking it down ASAP. They're weak, and they only take a little bit of fire, so you can kill them pretty quickly. But if you delay, their shots can pack quite a punch. The most common enemy is a drone or one of the many variants of the drone. Again, just shoot them and they go down pretty easily. Therons are a bit tougher, and you need to watch out for some of the variants. The Torque can take you down quickly, the Bolthawk will rip you apart, and when they have a Lancer, they'll actually try to chainsaw you if you get too close. Now there are a few other larger enemies, and I'll let you experience that for yourself, but the last of the main ones I wanted to cover are the Grenadiers. You recognize them by the straps on their chest, but also their weapons. They most commonly carry the Gnasher and frags. As evident by online play, the Gnasher packs quite a punch, and on higher difficulties your health is lower, so it hurts even more. For newer players, I highly suggest just keeping your distance and lancering these guys. But hey, gears can be the most fun when up close and personal. So say you do want to grab that Gnasher and take them on, how should you go about it? Well, the key is positioning and cover management. Again, not advised on higher difficulties, even for experienced players, but on casual, normal, and maybe occasionally on hardcore, you can move from cover to cover and evade fire and get close to them. Once you're near the enemies, it's actually advantageous not to be in cover. Find an angle that blocks you from enemy fire next to a full height wall or a column, stand behind that, and peek out to shoot. And if comfortable enough, hip fire around the wall. When attempting this, there's 2 main concepts to keep in mind: right-hand advantage and center screen shooting. Remember, the bullets come out of the center of the screen, not the barrel. So when hip firing, make sure you're aiming with the middle of your screen. The other aspect I mentioned there is right-hand advantage. When possible, try to position yourself like this. Have the wall to the left and the enemy coming from the right side. This gives the best possible advantage to keep your body in cover, but let you shoot around the wall. Okay, so let's summarize some stuff here. I highly recommend that your first playthrough be on normal difficulty, and ideally in co-op mode if possible. For the best experience, I'd advise against Googling lore-based questions and try to experience the whole thing yourself. The Lancer, or just rifles in general, are your best friend, and you should always keep one in your loadout. Power weapons can be fun, but often aren't as effective as you'd expect. Grenades are great for closing emergence holes. Melee is pretty powerful, especially against weaker enemies and on lower difficulties. In general, your best bet is keeping your distance and rifling people, and be extra careful when facing off against Grenadiers. If you follow these tips, you should hopefully have an awesome experience with Reloaded. Remember, this game uses mechanics from a 19-year-old game, so it's not the most modern feeling. That said, enjoy it for what it is. It's what got thousands of us hooked on the series and kept us coming back for years and years. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll catch you next time.